start our webinar. I hope you can all hear us. Okay, so this is Tuba İçmeli from the UNFCCC Secretary. Thank you for joining us today, and we also hope that you and all your loved ones are in good health and safe. First, I would like to welcome all our participants to this CGE webinar for the Asia-Pacific region as a part of its 2020 work plan. And I also, for the ones who don't know about what is CGE, so CGE, or the Consultative Group of Experts, is an expert group which assists developing counterparties in fulfilling their reporting requirements under the convention, and it also supports the implementation of the enhanced transparency framework under the Article 13 of the Paris Agreement. So in that context, this webinar will be the first of the 3 regional webinars to be organized within this year, and these are aimed at the greenhouse gas inventory compilers and sector experts to discuss the matters on transitioning from the revised 1996 IPCC guidelines to the 2006 guidelines for national GHG inventories. So this one is for the Asia-Pacific region, as I told, and the second one will be on African and Eastern European region in May, and we will have another third one for the Latin American and the Caribbean region in June. At this point, actually, I also would like to encourage you all to subscribe to our mailing list at tisu@unfcc.int, so you can receive announcements about our next webinars or other events in upcoming events. Also, you can always visit our website at unfcc.in/CGE to reach more materials on more training materials or any other materials on how to facilitate the participation into the transparency arrangements under the Convention and also under the Paris Agreement. I also would like to tell you that this webinar will be recorded, and the recording will be uploaded to the CGE website together with the presentations. So now, actually, I would like to introduce you our panelists. We have 2 distinguished CGE members with us today, Ms. Tian Wang and Mr. Kyoto Tanebe. Ms. Tian Wang is an assistant professor in the Division of Statistics and Assessments of the National Center for Climate Change Strategy and International Cooperation of the People's Republic of China. And Mr. Kyoto Tanebe is the co-chair of IPCC Task Force on National Greenhouse Gas Inventories. So they have an impressive amount of knowledge and experience and expertise on national greenhouse gas inventories, national communications, annual update reports, and also MRV systems. So during this webinar, Ms. Tian Wang will share with us an overview and evolution of the GHG inventories and IPCC guidelines, and Mr. Kyoto Tanebe will then elaborate on technical considerations regarding the transitioning from the 1996 to 2006 IPCC guidelines. Please also note that after their presentations, you will have the opportunity to ask questions then. So please send your questions through the QA function of this webinar. You can start even sending your questions while listening to the presentations, but our panelists will address all of these questions at the end of their presentations. So as a last point, we also prepared a survey to hear about your opinions about this webinar, and a link will appear at the end of it. So I greatly appreciate if you could kindly take a moment to fill out that very brief survey. So now we will just listen to our distinguished panelists. I will just pass the floor to Tian. So she can start with her presentation. The floor is yours, Tian.
I hope my voice is
Yes.
voice is clear now.
Yes, I can hear you. I hope everyone also hears you.
Okay, now I'm sharing my screen. And thank you, Tuba, for your introduction. And also I want to thank our Secretariat colleagues for organizing this webinar. And also thanks to our participants for your time to participating in our today's webinars. And in the following presentation, I will use about 10 minutes to give you an overview of greenhouse gas inventories, IPCC guidelines, and good practice guidance. So my presentation includes the following contents. So first, we briefly to look at what are national GHG inventories and why do we need it. And then we move to how to estimate and to increase the accuracy and the credibility of some good practices. And finally, I will show an evolution picture of our IPCC inventory guidelines and also to share some most updated UNFCCC rules and practices. And then you will learn more about the detailed or technical parts of the transitions from Kyoto. So first, what are national greenhouse gas inventories? So as you know that greenhouse gas inventories are the estimation of all emissions as well as all removals of particular gases from given sources in a defined region and in a specific period of time. And in this context of UNFCCC context, we are dealing with greenhouse gases in the national regime, in your country's boundary, and also in our most updated rules, we need to make annual estimates. So national estimates and annual estimates are the key words for the national greenhouse gas inventories. So why we need the greenhouse gas inventories? So first, it increases our scientific understanding because we know that there are many scientists. They need this data for their model inputs, and then they can understand the link between environmental pollution effects to sources of pollutions. So from the scientific understandings, as for not only for the IPCC, but for the national use, the greenhouse gas inventories is the key foundations to understand how much we have emitted to the atmosphere. And second, for the policy purpose, we need to understand whether the emissions is efficiently controlled before we make any decisions to solve these problems. And the greenhouse gas emissions can show us what's the key categories, which means that which part is the biggest emissions in our greenhouse gas inventory. Then we can develop cost-effective policies to address these key categories, the key emission sources. And also when we develop the time series greenhouse gas inventories, we can monitor progress towards policy goals, such like we can know our annual emissions and how far we are still from our emission targets. Finally, it also has the function to inform the public, for the public to understand how much we have emitted and how much efforts we are making to achieve our goals. And also under the DPSR model, like the drivers, the pressure, state, impact, we need the greenhouse gas inventories to help us to understand what's the drivers behind emissions, such like industry from the transport sectors, and also to understand the pressures, like how much is the emissions. And also the greenhouse gas inventories help us to understand the state and impact. And based on this, we can develop our responses, which include both adaptation measures and mitigations. For example, if we know that emissions are from the industry or transport sectors, we can develop the mitigation policy and measures in the public transport and industry sectors. And why do we need inventory guidelines? So before I explain the importance of our greenhouse gas inventories, and here we are coming to the inventory guidelines. So because climate change is a global issue, so we need international standards or international agreements to limit climate change and greenhouse gas emissions. So we need to set emission limits, targets, and goals to monitor the progress in an open and transparent way. So currently, most national emissions can only be estimated, not measured. Although we know that there are some measuring practices at the enterprise level or at some specific greenhouse gases, but generally we need a consensus on how to estimate that in a standardized way. So to do this, we need reliable and generally accepted methods and guidelines. And in the meantime, we will also need the guidelines to be inclusive as much as possible, because we see that the greenhouse gas emissions is very diverse across different nations. And how to estimate? I believe that our participants are generally familiar with this, because I believe most of you are greenhouse gas experts. So generally, it's activity data multiplied by the emission factors. Here we are showing an example in the energy sectors, but mostly in other sectors, the very basic functions are very similar. That we use activity data. It could be a few consumptions, or it could be the number of animals to multiply by the specific emission factors. And also, the key point for the IPCC guidelines, greenhouse gas guidelines, is to ensure the credibility. So credibility, there are two aspects. One is verifications, means that the numbers needs to be checked to be correct, and whether they can reflect the unbiased emissions. And the other part is validation. It is meaning that it's checking the estimates are compiled correctly in the way they are supposed to be done. So it needs a common methodological framework and an inventory management to ensure the credibilities. And in the IPCC guidelines, we are seeing that there are QA and QC procedures to ensure this. Now we are coming to good practices. So here, the good practices meaning that the guidelines could assist countries that in producing inventories that are accurate. And here, the accuracy in our context meaning neither over nor underestimates. So, and at the same time, the uncertainties are reduced as far as possible. So the guidelines needs to give a way to manage uncertainties and identify main key category to focus resources.
Hello, I think we lost Tian. Let's just wait for her. I will just try to reach her. We just ask for a few minutes of your patience, please. Dear participants, we just had Tian is back again. Please, we ask your patience for a few more minutes. Tian, now we can hear you. Can you hear us?
Here.
Yes.
Yes.
We just lost you, yes, during your presentation, and we really appreciate if you can just move forward from the good practice slide, the second slide of the good practice from your presentation. Hi, Tian, can you hear us? Can you? Yes, now we can see your screen. Well, we cannot hear you, dear Tian. We still cannot hear you. Okay, I think we just lost. Dear Tian, we really cannot hear you. Okay, so dear Tian, we cannot hear you. So can I actually kindly ask Kyoto if he can take over the presentation? Dear Kyoto, would it be possible?
It's possible.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I can hear you. I hope everyone can hear you also.
Okay. And
I think they can hear you, yes.
Suba, why don't you put the presentation on the screen and Kyoto can continue?
Yes, Kyoto, you can share your screen now. Yes, we were just
okay.
there. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Tian, for your presentation. Let me take it over now. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kyoto Tanabe, a CGE member from the IPCC, and I'm very happy to talk to you in this webinar. So I have to start from this slide, right? IPCC good practice gives guidance on gives guidance on various aspects of inventory preparation, including approaches to data collection and uncertainty evaluation, etc. Good practice guidance provided by the IPCC supports the development of inventories that are transparent, well documented, consistent over time, complete, comparable, and assessed for uncertainties, and are subject to quality control and assurance. Over time, IPCC inventory guidelines have evolved, starting from the first one produced in 1995. In 1996, revised 1996 guidelines were produced, and that 1996 guidelines were elaborated more in detail by the two good practice guidance reports in 2000 and 2003. And after that, based on all the earlier guidelines, including 96 guidelines, good practice 2000, and good practice guidance for LULUCF in 2003. Based on all those earlier guidelines, 2006 guidelines were produced by the IPCC. And recently, IPCC also developed some supplementary guidance and also refinement to the 2006 guidelines. For example, in 2013, two reports were produced. One is about wetlands, particularly. We call it wetland supplement. And also another report to supplement the methodological guidance for the purpose of Kyoto Protocol second commitment period about land use change, and forestry. That was KP, so-called KP supplement. These two supplement reports were produced in 2013, and very recently, last year, so-called 2019 refinement was produced by the IPCC to update partially the 2006 IPCC guidelines. This is the history of inventory guidelines by the IPCC. As probably everyone knows, currently so-called non-Annex 1 parties are using 1996 guidelines, and some of them are also using good practice guidance reports. On the other hand, Annex 1 parties have already started using 2006 IPCC guidelines. That's the current situation. But actually, and in reality, 2006 IPCC guidelines are already being used by more and more non-Annex 1 parties. The 2006 guidelines are being used by more and more non-Annex 1 parties, as referred to in the conclusions of 42nd session of subsidiary body for implementation. And under the Paris Agreement, the so-called Katowice Climate Package adopted in 2018 to operationalize the Paris Agreement. In that climate package, Katowice Climate Package, Decision 18 CMA1 is about modalities, procedures, and guidelines for transparency framework under the Paris Agreement. And in that guidelines, MPG, there is a stipulation that each party shall use 2006 IPCC guidelines. So not only developed country parties, but also all the developing country parties have to use 2006 IPCC guidelines under the Paris Agreement. And that's all about the overview of greenhouse gas inventory and IPCC guidelines. Now, I would like to move to the second part of this presentation. Here is the contents. Under the UNFCCC or under the Paris Agreement, each party has to prepare and report your national greenhouse gas inventories. Here, I would like to underline that there are two phases, preparation and reporting of national greenhouse gas inventories. Particularly under the Paris Agreement, as my colleague Ian explained, as I explained, each party must use the 2006 IPCC guidelines for preparation of its national greenhouse gas inventories, which means emissions and removals of greenhouse gases must be estimated following the guidance provided in the 2006 IPCC guidelines. After estimation of emissions and removals, the inventory must be reported in accordance with the reporting guidance provided in the modalities, procedures, and guidelines for the transparency framework under the Paris Agreement. And this reporting guidelines under the Paris Agreement is somewhat different from the reporting guidance in the 2006 IPCC guidelines. Here, there is some complication. We have to keep this in mind. Therefore, in this presentation, I will firstly talk about the 2006 IPCC guidelines with regard to the aspect of inventory preparation or estimation of emissions and removals. Specifically, about general guidance and sectoral guidance, difference from 1996 guidelines and good practice guidance reports, and also new guidance for new categories. Then, after that, I will share with you some consideration on how to transit, how to shift from 1996 guidelines to 2006 guidelines. And lastly, I will share with you some consideration on inventory reporting under the UNFCCC or under the Paris Agreement. The 2006 IPCC guidelines consists of 5 volumes. Volume 1 is about general guidance, and the other 4 volumes provide emission methods for each of 4 inventory sectors. Sector structure has changed from the 1996 IPCC guidelines. For example, the industrial processes sector and solvent and other product use sectors in the 1996 guidelines have been combined into one single sector, IPPU, that is in volume 3. Likewise, the former agriculture sector and land use change and forestry sector, these 2 sectors have been integrated into one single sector, AFOLU, volume 4. Thus, the sector structure has changed, but methodological approaches have not greatly changed at the individual category levels, except for land categories in AFOLU sector. General guidance provided in volume 1 and sectoral guidance in volumes 2 to 5 are complementary. So, for example, when you estimate emissions from energy sector, it is advisable that you read not only volume 2, but also volume 1 in order to produce good practice inventories. Now I want to go through some key differences between 96 guidelines good practice guidance reports and 2006 IPCC guidelines. However, it is impossible to explain details of the difference exhaustively during this short webinar. So for more details, I would like you to look into, for example, the primer to the 2006 IPCC guidelines, and also the overview chapter of the 2006 IPCC guidelines. Both are available from the IPCC TFI website provided there. First, general guidance provided in Volume 1. General guidance applicable to all sectors has been elaborated in the 2006 guidelines about such as approaches to data collection, uncertainty analysis, key category analysis, and so on. This general guidance helps you continuously improve the quality of your inventory through a systematic inventory cycle. This is a typical inventory developing cycle. And every year or every 2 years, you can go through this inventory development cycle. And here you see, for example, key category analysis or uncertainty analysis as an integral part of this development cycle. Thus, the 2006 IPCC guidelines, Volume 1 general guidance, much better helps you in regular preparation of inventory biannually through a systematic manner. Most of the elements in this general guidance are updates of the guidance already included in the good practice guidance reports. So, if you have already used those good practice guidance reports with 1996 guidelines, then you are probably already familiar with them, and you will have no difficulty in using these general guidance elements. Energy sector. The changes from 96 guidelines are minimal, but the 2 new sources have been added, namely urea-based catalysis and also carbon dioxide transport and storage. In addition, more details have been provided, particularly for fuel combustion activities and manufacturing industries and construction, and also for fugitive emissions from fuels, particularly oil and natural gas systems. More explanation can be found in the overview chapter, page 10, and also primer to the 2006 guidelines, page 18. IPPU, Industrial Processes and Product Use Sector. Here, the whole sector has been restructured, and you will find various categories that were not present in the 96 guidelines. Some of them were previously included implicitly in other categories, and for some others, new guidance is provided in the 2006 guidelines. Emissions from non-energy use of fuels were considered in energy sector in the 96 guidelines, but now the guidance on that is included in this IPPU sector in a more comprehensive and elaborated manner. More explanation can be found in addition to the overview chapter and the primer, particularly Annex 3 to Volume 3 of the 2006 IPCC guidelines, which is titled Improvement since 1996. In this annex, you can find more explanation about key differences between 96 guidelines and 2006 guidelines. AFOLU, Agriculture, Forestry, and Other Land Use Sector. As mentioned already, this sector is an integration of former agriculture sector and land use change and forestry sector. In the 96 guidelines, there was land use change and forestry sector, but it was reorganized into land use change and forestry sector with a new classification of categories and a new approach. In the good practice guidance reports, it is based on land use types rather than activities. There has been changes in two steps. In the 96 guidelines, agriculture sector and land use change and forestry sector were separate, and it covered only the most important activities resulting in greenhouse gas emissions and removals. However, in the good practice guidance reports that were produced as an elaboration of 96 guidelines, two separate sectors remained, but LUCF sector was reorganized into LUCF sector. And in this phase, emissions and removals in all land uses and all carbon pools are covered, not only the most important activities. And then, lastly, when the 2006 guidelines were produced, two sectors were integrated into one single sector, AFOLU, with the same approach as good practice guidance for LULUCF for land categories. This is the history of the evolution of AFOLU sector. This diagram shows how the sector structure has evolved. As you see here, from 96 guidelines to good practice guidance reports, there was a rather big change in land-related categories, while there was no change in agriculture sector. Then, from good practice guidance reports to 2006 guidelines, the land-related categories remained the same, while the agriculture categories were reorganized. But this reorganization of agriculture categories was not so big as compared to the change in land categories from 96 guidelines to good practice guidance. That being the case, if you are already using the good practice guidance for LULUCF together with the 96 guidelines for your inventory, then you will not have difficulties in using the 2006 guidelines, because 2006 guidelines land use categories are quite similar to those in good practice guidance LULUCF. More explanation can be found in addition to the overview chapter and the primer. You can see the chapter 1 of volume 4 of the 2006 guidelines. Waste sector. The scope is similar to the 96 guidelines and good practice guidance 2000. Sources that were not explicitly included in the earlier guidelines have been added in order to complement the guidance to cover all major waste management practices, such as biological treatment of solid waste, open burning of waste, and septic tanks and latrines. More explanation about the waste sector can be found in the overview chapter, pages 11 to 12, and also in the primer, page 20. This slide lists the new guidance in the 2006 guidelines. I mean, the sources for which guidance was not explicitly provided in the 96 guidelines. Such categories guidance is listed here. As you see, in this table. For example, in the IPPU sector, Industrial Processes and Product Use sector, which is marked in light green, various industries and products are now in the 2006 guidelines explicitly included. So far, until now, we have been looking through the overview of 2006 guidelines, focusing on difference from the 96 guidelines. Now, let's consider how we can transit, how we can shift from 96 guidelines to 2006 guidelines in actual inventory compilation. Again, details must be considered carefully at each category level, taking national and local conditions into account. But unfortunately, we cannot go into such details in this short webinar. So instead, now let me touch upon two general points. For the categories that were already present in the 96 guidelines, in many cases, estimation methods have not changed. So the data and data sources currently used can be also used under the 2006 guidelines. However, for some categories, even simple Tier 1 method has been modified. And in that case, you have to change activity data and other data accordingly. Where you are using default emission factors, according to the 96 guidelines or good practice guidance reports, you have to change the default emission factors to the updated ones in the 2006 IPCC guidelines. For the categories identified as key categories according to your key category analysis, data may need to be changed to use higher TA methods from Tier 1 methods. On the other hand, for the categories that were not explicitly included in the 96 guidelines, firstly, you have to investigate whether the greenhouse gas sources relevant to those categories exist or not in your country. If they exist, sources of activity data and other relevant data must be identified. Default emission factors in the 2006 guidelines can be used for the first estimates, but after key category analysis, if those categories are identified as key, then you have to change default emission factors to higher TA emission factors, particularly country-specific emission factors or local emission factors. So these are general two important points in transition from 96 guidelines to 2006. Last but not least, let me share with you consideration on reporting of inventory, which was produced using the 2006 guidelines. First, as the current MRV system will continue at least for a few more years, let's consider reporting under the current MRV system. According to Annex 3 to Decision 2 CP17, biannual update report PUR should include reporting tables 1 and 2 in the Annex to Decision 17 CP8. These two tables are based on the 96 guidelines. Then, how can we report the inventory produced using 2006 guidelines in the format based on the 96 guidelines? This is a big question. This is not straightforward. but we have a solution that would be to use or consult the IPCC inventory software. This software provided by the IPCC helps inventory compilers prepare greenhouse gas inventories following the 2006 guidelines. And also it has a function to produce NAI, non-Annex 1 reporting tables, whose format follows tables 1 and 2 of Annex 2 Decision 17 CP8. And also Annex 1 to the user manual of this IPCC inventory software is also particularly useful, as it shows the details on mapping of the emission estimates based on the 2006 guidelines to this NAI reporting tables. The IPCC inventory software and its user manual can be obtained from the IPCC TFI website for free. Please note that they are updated from time to time, so it is advisable you keep your eyes on this website. Then, what about the reporting in the future? At the latest, from the end of the year 2024, each party has to start reporting under the Enhanced Transparency Framework for Action and Support, referred to in Article 13 of the Paris Agreement. According to the modalities, procedures, and guidelines for this transparency framework, each party must report the following sectors: energy, IPPU, agriculture, LULUCF, and waste. Thus, you have to report agriculture and LULUCF separately, not as a single AFOLU sector. As the common reporting tables under the transparency framework are still under development, details of reporting cannot be discussed here yet. However, at least we should note the following. First, category codes will be different from those in the 2006 IPCC guidelines. In this presentation, you have seen some category codes in some slides, but they are 2006 guidelines category codes. So please be careful. You must note that those category codes presented in this presentation slides will be different from the category codes to be used under the transparency framework of Paris Agreement. Second, developing country parties are already using the 2006 IPCC guidelines and reporting agriculture and LULUCF sectors separately. Therefore, their experiences will be helpful to developing country parties. Probably you can find good examples on how AFOLU estimates can be disaggregated into agriculture and LULUCF for reporting in the inventories reported by developed countries. That's all. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Kyoto. And actually, I also see Tian here. I hope yes, she will be able to answer some of the questions. And actually, first of all, I would like to thank you for your very comprehensive and very informative presentations on this really highly technical topic. And I believe actually the participants also improved their knowledge and their understanding of the concepts and the key differences between these two sets of guidelines. So actually, to further discuss these matters, now I would like to read out some questions just sent to us from the participants. Now there is, for example, there is a question. One of them is about the 2019 refinement. So one of our participants is asking, what aspects are the 2019 refinements looking at, and will the parties need additional training to use them? Or maybe you can also just give us some information about what this 2019 refinement is, and is it something mandatory or it's just voluntary? So yes, Tian and Kyoto, we will be happy to listen you now.
May I answer?
Okay,
Hello?
thank you. Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Thank you for the questions about the 2019 refinement. That new report, 2019 refinement, was developed by the IPCC because the 2006 IPCC guidelines were produced already more than 10 years ago. So the task force, the Bureau of the Task Force on Inventories under the IPCC considered that some parts can be updated from the 2006 guidelines. Therefore, firstly, the IPCC Task Force on Inventories identified which part of the 2006 guidelines can or should be updated. It was considered that full revision of the entire 2006 guidelines is not necessary, but there are various parts in the 2006 guidelines that can be updated based on the recent scientific knowledge. So that's why the 2019 refinement was produced. And because that report is based on the most up-to-date scientific information and knowledge, you can find a lot of useful guidance there. But in the context of the UNFCCC or the Paris Agreement, as far as I understand, there has been no discussion, no consideration by the parties about the use of 2019 refinement. That's the status. That's the current status. Therefore, I think it is not yet mandatory for the parties to use. Okay. And therefore, I think the UNFCCC side is not yet considering offering training programs for particularly 2009 refinement. Currently, at this moment, it is 2006 guidelines that is mandatory for all the parties to use under the Paris Agreement. That's the current situation. But in the future, as noted in the Katowice climate package, any refinement or supplement to the 2006 guidelines, if it is agreed by the CMA, then those new reports will be also mandatory for use by the party. That's my understanding.
Thank you for your answer, Kyoto. And I also see Tian online, but I also have a lot of questions, two of them, so we can also respond to them. And please, I would like to also let you know that we will just compile all the questions and we'll be addressing them in the next webinar, and also we'll be providing more information in our website on this, because there is a lot of questions in the chat function. So actually, thank you for these questions. So one of the another question would be if the parties use 2006 guidelines, do they need to include CTF tables as annex for non-annex countries reporting for national communications? And also there's another question asking for the main differences in terms of QA, QC, quality assurance and quality control with the last guidelines. And there is another question actually asking for the main on the AFOLU sector. Actually, the question is agriculture, land use and land use change, and forestry were combined in the new guidelines, but have to be reported separately. And the participant is asking for a little more elaboration on that. So these will be the questions I will be just reading out you now, and the rest will be also answered to our website. Thank you. Yes, dear Kyoto or dear Tian. Actually,
hello, Tukba, can you hear me?
Hi, hello Tian. Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Sorry.
Thank you for just. Thank you. Please.
Oh, yes. I think I will try to answer part of them and leave the part on guidelines, IPCC guidelines to Kyoto. And as a question for the CTF tables, so in 2018, we only decided that the non-Annex 1 countries, and actually all parties, shall use the 2006 guidelines. But we didn't agree on whether we what kind of the common tables we should use to report on the greenhouse gas emissions. And actually, we are still negotiating on these very key issues. And there are different proposals, such like we can, the Annex 1 countries' common reporting formats lays a very good foundations. And also we see there were common tables used by non-Annex 1 countries in their inventory or NC guidelines before. So yes, we are still negotiating on the common tabular formats for the inventory tables. And the mandate is we should have consensus by the end of this year or at the COP26. So it will be agreed soon. And for the QA/QC, we also have the paragraph in our new MPG that the non-Annex 1 countries needs to report at least general QA/QC procedures, and are encouraged to report their QA/QC procedures by categories. So that's from our UNFCCC rules. And Kyoto, maybe you can share more insights from in IPCC guidelines.
Yeah, thank you, Tian. About the QA/QC, I agree with Tian. And if I may add, detailed guidance on how to implement QA/QC was not provided in the 96 guidelines, but that was provided in good practice guidance report. And the guidance in 2006 guidelines about it is similar to those in good practice guidance reports. Therefore, if you already have used good practice guidance reports, then you can just continue with some updates based on 2006 guidelines. You can just continue implementing QA/QC. And if you have not yet used good practice guidance reports, and you are using only the 96 guidelines, then the guidance on QA/QC guidelines will be very useful to make sure that your inventory quality is to be improved in the future. That's one. And there was a question about, I think, reporting AFOLU estimates into two sectors, agriculture and WCF. As I explained in the last slide, it was so decided, so each party has to follow that guidance. And it's not very straightforward. You have to estimate emissions and removals according to 2006 guidelines That means you have to look into volume 4, AFOLU, in order to estimate greenhouse gas emissions removals from agriculture and land use sectors. And but when you report the estimated results under the Paris Agreement, you have to separate that estimates into agriculture and food sphere, into those two sectors. It's not straightforward. It's not very. It may not be very easy, but fortunately, annexation parties have already been doing that. Therefore, you can find good examples in their inventories how the AFOLU single sector AFOLU estimates can be disaggregated into agriculture and food sector. You can. I'm sure you can find good examples. I cannot provide you very concrete examples right now here, but I'm sure you can find examples there. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Tian. Actually, we can conclude our webinar here. So before closing, let me once more thank you, Tian and Kyoto, for explaining us these matters and all the information you provide. And I also would like to thank all our participants for the interest and their questions. And I greatly appreciate if you would kindly take a moment to fill out the brief survey that will just appear on your screen when you leave. So please stay safe, and this is the end of the webinar. Thank you all. Thank you. Have a nice day.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.